Have you ever heard or used the phrase, you had one job? Have you ever heard people say that about something where it's like, you just had one thing you had to do and somebody didn't do it well or didn't do it right? Well, in biblical terms, if you're a prophet, if God's calling you to be a prophet, you have one job, and that one job is obedience. So if the Lord God shows up to you and says, hey, I want you to do X, or I want you to go to Y, the prophet's job is to say, I will do X, or I will go to Y. And most of the time in the Bible, that's what happens. We think of prophets like, for example, Isaiah, who is in the temple in Isaiah chapter 6 and has this incredible experience of seeing the Lord and just is totally blown away. And he hears the voice of the Lord say, who shall we send and who will go for us? And Isaiah, like a prophet should, boldly and immediately says, here am I, send me. There are two notable exceptions to this in the Hebrew Bible. One is the prophet Jonah, who God tells Jonah, I want you to go to the Ninevites, I want you to head east and give them this message. And Jonah says, nope, and he heads west and gets on a boat to sail west in the exact opposite direction of where the Lord tells him to go. And of course, it makes a great story. But there's a second person who's actually much more prominent and significant in the Hebrew Bible than Jonah, to whom the Lord appears and says, I have a job for you to do. And that person does not immediately respond with, of course, I'll go. And that person is none other than Moses. Moses, who is a towering figure in the Torah, in the Hebrew scriptures. His influence is significant all throughout history, certainly in the New Testament as well. And yet, Moses, when the Lord appears to him in a burning bush, he doesn't just make one excuse. He makes not just two or three excuses. He gives God 5 different excuses about why he can't do what the Lord is asking him to do. And he says things like, well, I'm not a good speaker, and who am I to say sent me, and how am I? He's just filled with excuses. And the 5th one is our verse of the day. It comes in chapter 4, verse 13, where after God has 4 different times expressed how through God's love and God's power, God is going to help Moses overcome his fear, Moses finally says, oh my Lord, please send someone else. And God's response is, then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. You know, you and I can come up with all kinds of excuses about why we can't do what the Bible or Jesus or God tells us to do. But you know, God is really not terribly interested in our excuses. What God is interested in is faithful obedience. Don't let your fear get in the way of your faithful obedience and doing what God is calling you to do.